Hi everyone, welcome to this ADS webinar on responsible and ethical use of AI. So welcome everyone. I see we have about 40 people here so far, and we are very excited to be having this event today with Richard Benjamin and Aysenur Bilgin. So we will be talking about responsible and ethical use of AI. Firstly, a little bit about Amsterdam Data Science. We are a network organization that caters for and connects academics, industry, and society in the fields of data science and AI. We try to host, well, pre-corona, about one meetup a month. Post-corona, we're doing webinars once every 2 weeks or so. And we hope to bring to you some interesting topics from interesting speakers like today. So please check our meetup page if you're looking for any further events, or you can join our newsletter via the website. So I think it's time to introduce our first speaker. So Richard Benjamin is Chief AI and Data Strategist at Telefonica, based in Madrid. He is also co-founder and vice president of the Spanish Observatory for Ethical and Social Impacts of AI. Today, Richard will talk about responsible use of AI by design. This will include proposed guidelines for organizations committed to the responsible use of AI but lack the required knowledge and experience. So I guess without further ado, I would like to welcome Richard onto the stage.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here in Amsterdam. Actually, I'm from the Netherlands, so it's my city, even though I'm living for many years already in Madrid. I will tell you something about the responsible use of AI by design. Yeah, if you find this talk interesting, you can always read more about it in the two books you see here on the right side, one in Spanish and one in English, which is forthcoming this summer. Now, what will I give? I will give you an overview, a bit of a context and motivation. So why it is important to speak about the responsible use of AI. Do that by using, highlighting the business opportunity, some unintended negative consequences that we see, and also then the latest trend on what is happening in the world around these consequences. And then I will focus on challenges that organizations have in dealing with this. Yeah, and there are basically two challenges which I will highlight. One is, how do you select your AI principles as an organization? And secondly, how can you make them happen and implement in your organization? Now let's go to the context. So we all know that AI will have a big opportunity in whatever we are doing, yeah, in our lives, in the economy, in the societies, etc. And some companies estimate the financial impact, the economic impact, which is huge. Yeah? And all this because AI has gone through a large upgrade in the last 10 years, which is basically happening because there's a huge amount of data, much more than we had in the beginning of AI. Computational power is accessible at an economic price, and there are new technologies like deep learning that take advantage of this technology, such as that they can recognize many different things in many different domains. Yeah? So a huge opportunity. If you look at a large company like Telefonica, it's a telecommunications provider, like a big brother of KPN. The use of this technology is in different areas. Yeah, I will very briefly highlight those areas so that you actually know what we are talking about. First is the internal usage, yeah? And this is basically what any company or organization in the world is currently doing with this kind of technology. Yeah, so it's understanding better what your customers are, knowing where they are in the life cycle, understanding their value. It's all about personalized and better targeted marketing. Understanding your customers can result in recommending them, content, movies, mobile phones. You can think about it. So there's a huge uplift in being more precise in marketing. And then there is the optimization aspect. Yeah, for instance, we are a telco. We deploy mobile networks and fiber across the world. and we spend a few billions a year in that process. Now, if we could optimize just 1% or even 0.5% of that process, it still means many hundreds of millions that we can save. So anything that leaves a trail, a digital trail in an organization, is subject to optimization using artificial intelligence and machine learning. Yeah, so huge opportunity, and that's why so many companies have started this journey. Yeah? But there are other things that you can do, like the customer facing. Yeah, you all know the chatbots, the digital assistants, and also in our company we use that to have 24/7 access to the company, not just general frequently asked questions, but really about your personal situation. Yeah, about how much data you've left, what promotions you are in, what your invoice will be, etc. So this is optimizing and improving your core business. Yeah, the main reason what companies are doing, why companies are doing this technology. But there are also very other interesting things that can be done. Yeah, for instance, in our case, in our mobile network, if we aggregate, anonymize the data, we can generate very interesting insights that are helpful for other sectors. Yeah, for instance, we see mobility data, we see footfall data, and that can be useful for optimization transport along the roads, of high roads. It can also be used for planning of optimizing the public transport system, planification of that, because there is data about how crowds move around different regions or cities. Yeah, that same data is also useful for social purposes. Yeah, so we've done a lot of work with using our insights from the mobile network for social purposes, like understanding the impact of earthquakes, forecasting, prediction and pollution in cities, and more recently for understanding mobility and impact of mobility measurements on the spread of COVID diseases. Yeah, that's something that we do on a daily basis, where we share information with the European Commission, so they can, from a European perspective, can understand how the virus is propagating and what will happen with certain measures, and also when vaccination is happening. Yeah, so those are pro bono activities that are based on the same technology that can also be used for commercial reasons. Now, so a lot of opportunities, in this space, but as we all know, there are also risks associated to usage of this technology, and mostly because the development is going very quickly and things are launched into the market before actually organizations can realize what's happening. I will not highlight all of those. I think if you are from the area, you probably know them. Just mention two examples here, which is the camera you see, where there's a square around every face except for one face, and that happens to be a colored person. Now, this machine, this camera is discriminating, but of course, it's not an intentional discrimination. It's just that when they trained the algorithm to recognize faces, they forgot that there are other faces than only white faces, and that's the consequence. Yeah? The same example you see on the right-hand side with Google Translate, where if you translate "she is a doctor" or "he is a nurse" to a language, in this case Turkish, that has no gender as such, and then you translate it back to English, you get "he is a doctor," "she is a nurse," which is the stereotypical thing of professions and gender. This is from a few years ago. Actually, if you do it now, Google has interfered in the algorithm. It's actually now giving different options. Yeah? Explainability is another problem. Privacy is another effect. So there is a huge amount of impact that is happening now. What have organizations done in the past few years in companies? Yeah? So they've come up with their principles of AI or ethics codes, of ethic guidelines, in terms of algorithms should not discriminate, they should be transparent, they should be explainable with privacy, etc. And there are even already many studies that looking at all those principles and try to understand, is there something common and how do they differ, etc. But there are quite a lot. Yeah. The European Commission is very active with what they call the guidelines, ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, which is based on 7 principles like human agency and oversight, technical robustness and safety, privacy, transparency, etc. Yeah. So this is now, let's say, out in the field, and companies and organizations can voluntarily adhere adhere to those principles if they don't have their own principles. Telefonica is a large company, published its principles or more than 2 years ago, which basically says that all the AI and big data we use should be fair, so it should not discriminate against variables that are forbidden, like race or religious preference. It should be transparent and explainable where that is needed. So if it has impact on people's life, like giving loans, etc. It should be human-centric, so humans should be in control when needed, and it should not go against the human rights and not against the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, should be with privacy and security. Yeah. And many large companies actually buy a lot of technology instead of building it themselves. So when we work with partners in the field of AI, we also ask those partners to adhere to similar or to the same principles, yeah, as a matter of methodology. Now, if you're a company and having seen this and you think, okay, I'm going to use AI at scale and I want to do it in a responsible way, there are two things you have to do. First, you have to select your principles, and second, you have to make sure that everybody follows those principles. Yeah? And those are two different problems. And while there is quite a lot of information about what kind of principles are there in the field, there is very little shared experiences and written literature on actually how do you select them and then how do you implement them consequently. Let's go to that. Yeah. So if you look at the problems that AI can create, or the use of AI, it's not, of course, the technology itself, but it's how it is used. Then there are many different things, like it's about fairness and non-discrimination. It's about fake news or malicious use. You can think of the future of work, what happens to our jobs, accountability, even lethal autonomous weapon systems. So there are many things. And so for companies, difficult, not only companies, also public administration. So where do they start? Should they take all of them or a few? But there are a few dimensions that you can look at that helps you take this decision. Yeah. So the first one is some things are really responsibility of the government. So what happens with the future of work and artificial intelligence? How to deal with those problems is not really something one specific company can work at. Of course, if you automate many things, it has an impact, but really the overall scope is defined by government. Yeah, the same about the kind of relations people and machines can have. Yeah, can a machine be your boss, etc. So those are things within the realm of governments. Yeah? But then there are, on the other side, there are things that companies really can do, like to have it private and with security. Yeah, to do non-discrimination. Yeah, to find bias and data. So those are in the realm. So that's the first step. Think about what is within your scope. So if you take that as a principle, you are able to act on it. Yeah, rather than just state it and then not be able to do anything. The second one, and this today is actually a simple divide, is between intended consequences and unintended consequences. Now, all the examples that you see, most of the examples that you see in the world are unintended consequences. Yeah, it's about Amazon discriminating, or Google discriminate, or not being explainable. And of course, that's not something they planned for, but it just happened. Yeah. Today, there are only a few things that are done really intendedly, which is I want to use AI for good, or I want to use it for bad, yeah, as a criminal organization. But with a more maturity coming into the years, this border will go up, yeah, and it will be clear when you actually discriminate with your algorithms or not, yeah, and then it becomes an intended decision. So it becomes very much more important to make a statement about it. But in general, focus on the unintended aspects, because the unintended one you probably are aware of. And then, so this is the part where you focus on, the unintended ones and the ones that are within the scope of your organization. Now, there's a third dimension that is important to consider, and that is where you want to be very AI specific. And very specific things for AI: transparency, explainability, human agency in terms of autonomy, and fairness and non-discrimination, or whether you want to cover everything that an AI system has to deal with, which includes privacy, security, safety, human rights, etc. Yeah? Now, the decision is basically, if you have already things in place for privacy and security, there is already a governance model. Maybe you can focus your principles on AI specific things. But if you want to cover everything and you don't have the other things not yet in place, you can do an end-to-end approach. Yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages for each, but it's important to take a decision. Yeah? And the last reason, the last aspect to take into account if you want to decide what principles to do is consider the sector you are in. Yeah, for instance, if you are in an industrial sector with a lot of physical machines and robots, safety is very important. If you are in the health sector, where you take important decisions about people's lives and the health, then explainability is very important. Yeah? If you are in the financial sector and insurance sector and you are accepting customers for life insurance or for health insurance, fairness and non-discrimination is very important. So those are the four things that you can think of if you want to decide what principles you want to have. Yeah. Now the last point is, how do you implement those principles into an organization? Well, this is a complex process, but the good news, it's just another change management process. Yeah. So you have to adapt how your company or organizations work to a new thing, yeah, a new kid on the block, and that costs some effort, but in the end, organizations are able to do it. Yeah, think about the GDPR with privacy. It was a huge project for many organizations, but it's supposed to be in place now, and they have adapted. Yeah? So similar things will need to happen with this. We coined a term called responsible AI by design, similar to privacy and security by design. You don't look at those things at the end, but you start from the beginning. Yeah, and that requires a few things. First, you need the principles, the boundaries and the values that you stand for. You need to do a lot of training and a lot of awareness. Yeah, you can see here an overview of a course that we gave, that we are giving in our company to explain to people what it means, the social and ethical impact of artificial intelligence. You need to have a questionnaire where you can ask people questions about the products, and the next talk will exactly be about how could you implement that. And you need to have tools, because it's not so easy to find bias in data. Of course, you can't look at the data by yourself. You need tools to do that. And finally, you need a governance model that tells you who is responsible and what to do if things are not so clear. Yeah, you have two types of governance models here that are out there. One is a committee-based governance, where you have to ask permission for doing something, and then the committee tells you whether you can or not. And the other one is an on-demand based governance model, where you move forward as long as things are very clear, you have had the training, and only in cases of questions, you escalate up to a different level, and then you have other people who can help you take those decisions. Yeah? Our experience is that with the current state of play, which is quite new, it is better to do a bottom-up, on-demand governance model, because that makes people aware of the issues, it makes them self-responsible, whereas if you let it to a committee, they just ask questions, and once they get the answer, they do it or they don't. Yeah. So basically, that is what I wanted to tell you. Just very high-level conclusions. How do you select your principles? Well, you select those that you can act on. You select those that are fit for your sector and relevant for your sector. And you have to decide whether you want to be end-to-end or AI specific. Yeah? And then regarding implementation, follow a methodology. Any methodology will work. We did responsible AI by design, and put a lot of effort on training your employees and give and make them aware of the issues. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was very interesting. I see you inspired a lot of communication, especially around the wording that you used at the beginning, where it was saying that the developers had forgotten that there are other faces other than white faces. But I would just like to encourage the audience to ask any questions directly in the chat, and I can read those out. I actually wanted to ask you, can you give any use case examples of some of the challenges that you saw when implementing this in Telefonica? Like from departmental levels or things like that.
What do you mean with use case examples?
So when you're implementing these new methodologies, what did people often find most challenging?
Well, I think in general, people are enthusiastic about this because everybody is worried about those things. They are in the press everywhere, so there's a lot of attention, and that's positive. Yeah. What happens if you ask a certain person who works on a project and is doing AI, and you start to ask questions like this? Their reaction is a bit, it's like I have to pass an exam. Yeah. So they're doing an effort that they can always say, no, I don't have personal data, I don't have sensitive data. It is completely explainable, or there's no need for explainable. Where the only reason why you do such a questionnaire is understand where the product is and what the potential issues might be. So that's a cultural change from you feel like being tested and you have to pass, but actually you don't. You just have to be aware. So that is a challenge that you find if you roll it out at a large scale.
Yeah. I see a question from Jan Taco. He asks, is AI used in Telefonica contact centers?
Yes, we use AI in contact centers in several ways. So the first is that you can actually, in some of our countries, you can call with the machine, where the machine listens to you, tries to understand what you mean, and then dives in the systems and pulls out your data to give you an answer. So that's one way we use it. We also, of course, use it with on terms of the audio, what people actually try to say. So we try to analyze that and find out what are the common problems, etc. So the speech to text, and then it's NLP on top of that. So that is the other thing we use. And then, of course, optimization of the different processes.
There's another question from Frank. Are those guidelines for responsible AI just solving half the problem? Commercially available AI systems are usually sold as black box solutions with no access to the underlying model. Sometimes the end user is specifically prohibited from trying to inspect the model's licenses.
So, and what's the question about this?
So are those guidelines for responsible AI just solving half the problem?
Yes, the guidelines solve half of the problems. Yeah? As I said, you need to implement it in an organization. Yeah. So, for instance, in terms of explainability, of opening a black box, the first question is it needed to be transparent? Yeah, in this particular situation. So we have let's say a TV offering. We recommend, like Netflix, we recommend movies to people. But we don't feel we need to explain why we why we recommend a certain movie or not. Yeah. On the other hand, we have also a product where we offer loans to our customers, mobile loans, where we have an algorithm to check what's the interest rate that we have to offer, and that is their explainability is important. Yeah. So explainability is important in three different senses. The first is do you understand in general how the model works? Yeah, and then you can have a black box model or a white box model. And in this case, we use a white box model, so it's completely inspectionable. Yeah, it's not deep learning. It's just decision trees. And secondly, the customer might need to know why there is a certain interest rate. So those are things that you can manage, and it depends on the use case, and it depends on the type of user. What kind of explainability you will have. So if we use a model for a certain application that impacts people's life, and it's a black box model, and we cannot understand it, we won't use it.
Yeah. Great. And another question from Jonas. What was the trigger for introducing the AI principles at Telefonica?
The trigger was that we started to make a lot of, let's say, noise, and stating that AI is important for our company, big data is important, we have a lot of data, and we want to use it everywhere, And so it was becoming very important also in our strategic messaging with society, with analysts, with investors, with stakeholders. And we also saw at the same time there was a lot of upcoming press about kind of scandals, so we decided it's important to make a statement, and that was actually the trigger to do it. It's also true that if you look at the telco industry, it's not an industry that is super exposed to those things. So if you are a bank or an insurance company or a healthcare institution or a government, it's much more important. So of course we give coverage to people in terms of network. We recommend movies, we recommend devices, but hey, so it is not that people are dying, etc. So maybe in that case we were lucky, because maybe it's easier for us to make statements than an insurance company, and that's probably why we were one of the first. But it requires an effort to make such a statement, because you have to align the whole company, different departments, commercial interests, responsibility interests, all kinds of interests you have to align to be able to make such a statement, which then you have to live up to.
Yeah. And another question from Nima: does not the more explainable AI put companies at risk for being attacked more easily? So if there's more explainable AI, does it mean that companies have weaker defenses because it's more out in the open?
Well, that depends what you mean. How do you understand explainable? Of course, if you publish the algorithm as is, then you might be open to vulnerabilities. But explainability does not necessarily mean that. So you can also be explainable in terms of you explain how decisions are taking place in a format or language that is understandable by people, not necessarily by code. If you have to, for certain regulatory reasons, or because there's really a doubt about the system, you can always open the code up to regulators and to specialists, rather than opening it up to the large public. So the difference between, or let's say the tension between intellectual property and commercial interest of companies and explainability, sometimes it's presented as they're very far away. It's either the one or the other. I think that's much more a nuanced discussion, and it is possible to give access to code to understand, for instance, how Facebook or Google might work, without throwing it out in the open space.
Yeah. I was just seeing the time. Thank you so much, Richard, for that excellent talk and answering the questions. I think we will now move on to Aysenur Bilgin. So to introduce our next speaker, Aysenur is currently a data scientist at Victor Davis and an AI researcher at CWI. She has an interdisciplinary interest in design, development, and deployment of data-driven solutions. In her talk today, she will discuss her recent work at Victor Davis, which is focusing on a tool developed for operationalizing responsible AI through quantifying and benchmarking responsible data science practices. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Richard, for the talk. It was a great talk. And thank you, Jan, and thanks to ADS for having me today and inviting to this. Well, welcome, everyone. Thanks for having the time and coming to this session. So today, actually, I'm very excited to announce the beta launch of our tool called AI Fact Checker towards operationalizing responsible AI. So I'd like to start with the ideation behind the tool, which comes from the challenge that responsible AI is brought, and actually connecting to what Richard has just mentioned with the overwhelming slide. Responsible AI is an umbrella term, and it is overwhelming indeed. We don't have consensus about it. If you also think globally, and there are many, it's connected to many different aspects, from fundamental human rights to deep theoretical computer science concepts. But that doesn't mean that we cannot do something about it. Also because there is the notion that what gets measured gets improved. So this is kind of the motivation that we had, and we have it in many aspects of our lives as well. In healthcare, in life, in computer science, in economics, So we asked ourselves, okay, what can we do about this? How can we tackle this challenge of broad and abstract responsible AI with a lot of guidelines, checklists out there? And so how can we move towards measuring something for improvement in the context, in the realm of responsible AI? So we then decided okay, we need to look at this complex landscape of responsible AI. And we can identify two spaces. One, there's the challenge space, which is quite saturated. We know it's difficult to get up and going. There are so many different guidelines and organizational and regulations coming from different, independently from different bodies. And usually responsible AI is not incentivized yet, although there are regulations coming and catching up. And there's also the other space, the fragmented solution space, where there are a lot of efforts that also the community puts in terms of technical tools, statistical solutions, and sort of analysis. So how can we bridge these two spaces? We need to connect the challenge and the solution spaces on the grounds of the AI lifecycle. And we thought assessment tools can facilitate operationalization of responsible AI by just doing so. And in the next couple of minutes, I would like to take you through how we do this, how we operationalize responsible AI with the tool. And I will show you a short video of utilizing the tool from beginning to an end. And I'll also discuss about the current, the market research, what other tools are existing there. And I'm looking forward to your questions and suggestions and feedback. So AI Fact Checker provides a quantitative assessment of responsible AI based on fact principles. These principles are actually based on emerging from comparative studies that find consensus around many of these aspects, again, from professionalism to human rights and safety. And we kind of condense these in these 4 pillars that we call fact. So these pillars are fairness, accountability, confidentiality, and transparency. And note that these pillars have a lot of overlaps in between, and also tensions, like as we were talking, transparency versus explainability. And currently they have very vague kind of descriptions, and these notions mean different things to different people, also to different organizations. And what we do, we put these principles along the AI lifecycle. If you're working in industry, you might have heard of CRISP-DM. CRISP-DM stands for Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining, and it's been around for more than 20 years now. And there are several stages. So there's the feasibility stage, which has 2 stages in between. We start from business understanding, then we look at the data, and we go back to business understanding to improve our data understanding. Then in the development stage, we start with the data preparation and modeling. Again, this has a lot of back and forth in between. And in the deployment, we evaluate, we test, and then if it's ready for deployment, we deploy. And if we identify some things during our test, during evaluation, we might need to go back to our business understanding. Although this is, in theory, it is a nice graph, but what we know in the real world is that it just doesn't end there. AI is something very organic, responsible AI is as well. Standards change, best practices change, and these models live with us as our data lives with us. So we added this plus, where we also add this sustainment, where we need to monitor our models and maintain them. And while maintaining, once we realize we have some kind of data drift or concept drift, then we go to our evaluation. What were our KPIs for that? How they're affected. So then we might need to go back to the business understanding to reevaluate and to rethink stuff. So what we do is that we put these fact principles on the wheels of CRISP-DM+. And now I would like to take you through the core of the tool, which are the assessment statements that we gather from all these guidelines, checklists, the publications that are out there. And this is all human effort. So we try to understand what it means and how we can put this on the CRISP-DM level. And as you can see here, we gather an assessment statement, we curate that statement, and we assign these categories for CRISP main, CRISP sub. These were the small ones, from business understanding to modeling. And we assign a fact category, and we also assign weights. So while we're doing this, we rely on the scientific and statistical survey and questionnaire methodology. And the reason for that is we need to make sure that our assessment statements are understood by everyone and they are not leading. So, for example, all our statements start with in our AI initiatives, and here's a following example statement. We say we determine fairness criteria when dealing with protected classes before developing a solution. And as you can see, we assign all the categories for that, for CRISP-DM and fact. And we do this for every CRISP-DM sub and every fact. And as we go on, as you can see, for example, we also need to make sure that we have consistent statements. And there's, as I mentioned, a lot of effort in identifying these statements that are not leading or confusing. We also need to make sure, for example, by negating the assessment statements, for example, we use augmented data in test data set to validate the performance of our AI models. If you look at the best practices, this is not the way to go when you're validating your performance of our AI models. You should not use augmented data, but you should only use real-world data. And we continue to do so for all the stages. And we have some catch questions where we just want to check whether you're a human. And we expect the answer to be what's advised in the statement. So in nowhere we have automation for this. All is being curated by humans, but there is data analytics and data science behind it to validate whether we have come up with the right assessment statements. So here now I would like to show you a quick video. All right, so I hope the video was clear. So now I would like to talk about the market research that I mentioned. So AI Fact Checker actually is not the only tool in this space, and I think the assessment tools in this realm, the feature of them is promising. So when we look at the non-commercial side, we see from European Commission, they made us web tool, which is the assessment list on trustworthy artificial intelligence, which was only available for a limited amount of time, and it was ethics oriented. And Utrecht University has developed also a tool called DIDA, Data Ethics Decision Aid tool, also ethics oriented. And actually, as an initiative of the Dutch Red Cross from 510 Global, they've developed a fact score calculator, which again, they use the fact pillar. So in that sense, it is quite similar, but it's, it has, again, these statements or just yes and no. So the difference is, for example, is that we provide a Likert scale and we ask you to think of all your projects, or if you just think of one project, choose the never or always the end cases, for example. And on the commercial side, there is a app from KPMG called Dilemma app. It requires organizational login and it provides personalization on demand. It's again ethics oriented. And from PwC, there is a responsible AI diagnostics tool. It's a web app questionnaire on responsible AI topics. And they give you feedback score on your organization, and it's strategy oriented. So we kind of stand in between because we also have the community edition version, and we position ourselves in a technical implementation perspective. And now I would like to also discuss who is this tool aiming for. Of course, AI Fact Checker has a target audience. So the tool is aimed for data science, analytics leads, and managers, people who have this 360 view of what happens within the AI journey from the ideation to the deployment and how it's being used, what kind of impact it brings, and so on. So this could be AI-related product owners, or it could be teams perhaps comprising of different roles, from data scientists to developers to deployment engineers, team leaders, IT professionals, and so on. And in terms of costs, so we have the community version, which you can start using from today. And we also provide it as a service. So in that case, of course, we would like to go further into the industry and use case personalization. And we also offer more professional features, such as you can save your progress or track your progress on these fact principles. And in terms of benefits and gains, as you can see, within a single use, we aim to give you immediate insights for what you need to do and when you need to do. But it's not just, I've done the assessment, took me half an hour, okay, I got this score, am I done? No, you're not, because as I mentioned, this is something organic, and we advise the periodical use of these kind of tools. And if you think about it, this kind of periodical use will bring fair competition to the industry. So we did this kind of sector segmentation, and this gives us the opportunity to really benchmark and standardize what kind of best practices are being employed within one sector, for example. And this will open the way to responsible innovation. And before I close, I would like to just mention that we are really getting started with that, and we've just scratched the surface of a quite complicated landscape of responsible AI. And I would like to invite all of you to use the tool, to give us your feedback and help us improve it. I will also copy the link in the chat, so you don't have to type it. It's quite a long one. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions. Also, feel free to reach out either to the team through ai.factchecker@Victor Davis or to me directly from my email here. Thank you.
Yes, so you mentioned the beta session is out today. Have you had any? What kind of feedback have you had so far? I guess maybe not so much, but
we've had a lot of internal iterations because we wanted to see, as I mentioned, how our assessment score, assessment statements are being, comprehended. Are we? Can we get these assessment statements? And because we are talking about, these fact principles, can we actually cluster these statements with regards to the scores and the responses to these statements on these fact principles? So. And we've decided, okay, now AI Fact Checker is ready to meet the world, and we need the community to give us feedback and to use the tool and to improve it and to see, whether we can really build up on this and whether this is the way to go for responsible AI. to really, decide and see our future together.
And you're focusing mostly on those who have more of a 360-degree view of the business. Is this also applicable for more academic research as well?
Well, from academics, of course, because it has a lot of these kind of research that we did, looking through these papers, understanding and identifying what it relates to in terms of CRISPR, in terms of fact. So, how we can really operationalize this is this categorization or the allocation of these categories were quite an effort. Of course, we used our own expertise, but I think what we can do with also academic collaboration is that to help us come up with these statements, and we are willing to make these statements open source, because if we want them to be the best practice, if we want these practices to be employed by the sectors, we really want them to be disseminated and people start using it. So the idea of the tool is that you can compare yourself with your peers, and it's not about being a race, but it's really about, from a data scientist perspective, from a practitioner perspective, what I'm interested is that, okay, what practices are there that are emerging in these industries, and how can we make it more common? How can we increase the use of these practices? So really in the point of operationalizing responsible AI.
Excellent, yeah.
Yeah, someone posted it. Thank you, Miguel. I was going to do it too, but thanks.
Yes, yeah, the link to the AI fact checker is in the chat right now. And when we post online, we'll also include a link on our YouTube channel. Yeah, are there any other questions from our audience? Yeah, it was interesting. Andrew had asked if there's any overlap or collaboration between your fact model and Fred Prosper. Can you describe a little bit more about the differences between what you're providing and what others have already done?
Well, as I mentioned, the closest one was the 510 Globals, but they have done yes/no questions. And we, of course, took the questions into our curation pool, but we went a step further because we also had the CRISPR, where we really wanted to connect, okay, when should you do this? Not just in what pillar you should, according to what pillar you should be doing this, but when you should be doing that. So that was the main idea of really operationalizing it with connecting to industrial methodologies like CRISPR that we have. I see a question.
Yeah. Should I read it out?
Sure.
So there's a question from Hinda. Could we use this tool to justify not using AI for a given task?
I think we could incorporate that into the statements, and we could analyze how people react to those statements. So as I mentioned, for example, how we invert the questions, not using AI could be as well as part of, perhaps, in the deployment, you shouldn't deploy when you have identified this, not in that sense, but in a sense that not leading the user who will respond to that assessment statement, so that, because in the end, we list all these statements and we give the answer to the user, okay, this was your response. However, this is the best practice currently, and you can use these resources to learn more about it. And not using AI could be phrased in these statements, and it would be a good one. Thanks.
And then there's another question from Kedma. Which industries are the most open to responsible AI and which is the least?
This is hopefully what we are also willing to find with the tool. Because as Richard mentioned, right, AI is now very, it bears a lot of business opportunities, and from optimization to customer care, it has a lot of application points. So for responsible AI, we first started off with, if you have human data, if you have sensitive data, if you have protected classes, etc., what you need to, of course, focus on is the fairness part. and the industries that do that. For example, if you're a government organization, if you have people's data or telcos as well, if you hold sensitive data, it could be in any industry that deals with people. So more definite.
I think,
Richard,
yeah, let me comment a bit
I
on
can't
that.
actually hear you. I don't know if I can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, I do.
You can hear me or not?
There we are. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So I think if you look at what companies are sectors are most open to saying something about responsible AI, it's definitely the big tech. Yeah, it's the big companies who use it and are both basically under fire to use it. Secondly, I think it is the sector, like public administration as a sector, is also open to this because they feel they have to do it, even they are not prepared from a practical standpoint. And then if you look at industries that are very much focused on this, like healthcare or insurance, they're a bit slower, because that's really if they make statement, it really might have a direct impact on what they do. So they can work for years on what they want to do, etc. It doesn't mean they don't doing anything, but there are lots of discussions internally to do. And then there are like sectors like that are less impacted. They are a bit more quicker in making statements because it has less impact. For instance, in the Netherlands, it's just the media industry has just made a statement about the responsible use of AI and what they said. This is of course related to fake news and those things, and they came together and made a statement. This is, as a sector in the country, we stand for, etc. So it depends a bit, and then there are industries like energy, utilities. They are, from a digital transformation perspective, they are slower. So it's going. Therefore, the uptake of AI is slower, and therefore the need to make a statement about responsible AI is less urgent because they're not doing it yet.
That's interesting, and I think that actually follows on nicely to Frank's question, where is it enough for companies or organizations to be doing or using the AI fact checker voluntarily, or should we actually be requiring that organizations employ something like the AI fact checker, do the test, and publish their results more publicly? What do you think, guys?
Well, I think it would be lovely if organizations would do that. So actually, I'm not only working in Telefonica, I'm also founder of an NGO on the ethical and social impacts of AI. And we are actually want to create such a voluntary register where companies can register their products through a tool such as ICE presented to us, and maybe that tool. But that is voluntary. Whether it should be publicly by regulation or not, well, there are big discussions going on. Actually, Europe will come up with a statement in April, very soon, about how AI will be regulated in Europe. Expectation is it will not be across the board. It will be for certain sectors and for certain applications, the combination of that. And then the type of requirements we don't know yet what there will be. But this is a very hot topic across the world, whether it's enough, this self-regulation by companies and organizations or not. And it's, we can discuss about it for hours.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I was on mute, I realized later, sorry about that. Yes, I think currently, even though it would be voluntary, but regulations will catch up, and it's important to, not just as an organization, if you are producing AI yourself or if you're procuring it, I think these kind of scores will be better demanded by the public as well. So the more we talk about it, the more we come up with these things, then we will be also making people more aware about the existence of such assessments and following up with the regulations.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we will probably have to stop it there. Really appreciate both of you taking a Friday lunchtime to do this webinar for us. I think from all the feedback in the chat, people have really enjoyed it as well.